here on the Second Life Book Club here, as you would expect in Second Life. We broadcast live from here on Facebook, from here to Facebook and YouTube every third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. Second Life time or Pacific time for you folks in real life. We meet mystery authors and others from the publishing world to talk about books and the issues facing them today about social and technological change. And there's certainly a lot of those lately. I'd like to thank Droxta Depre, host of the Second Life Book Club and the Drax Files Radio Hour, both broadcast here from Second Life, for his sponsorship and the use of the Book Club Island. I'd also like to thank Strawberry Linden and Brett Linden for their help in setting this show up. And finally, my eternal thanks to Becky Hansen and Isabel Cherin for their technical assistance in making this happen. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. A special thanks to Isabel for getting up at 1 o'clock her time to run the camera. Thank you all.
Wow. Thank you, Isabel and Becky.
Yeah, Isabel is hardcore. Okay, let me introduce this evening's guest, Kellye Garret, the award-winning author of A Detective by Day mystery series. Her latest book, Hollywood Ending, is available wherever fine books can be found. Kellye, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Con. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, pleased to have you. Tonight, Kellye and I are going to be talking about her work. We're also going to be talking about the cozy mystery genre, a genre which is often misunderstood by many people. There's a perception out there that cozy mysteries are about little old ladies with pet cats baking cookies, solving murders somewhere out in the burbs. That's certainly a part of what it's about, but there's a lot more to cozy mysteries, and as a very profitable niche for many of the writers. So let's start talking with Kellye about her books. So Kellye, I know from your biography that you used to work in Hollywood. You were a scriptwriter on some well-known shows. Did that have anything to do with how you started your books?
How I started my books. I think my books, obviously, if you can tell from the titles, they take place in Hollywood, so they're definitely based on my experiences when I lived in Los Angeles and also my friends' experiences. I think people, when they think of Hollywood, they think of like a Will Smith or a Tom Cruise, someone who's just uber famous and uber rich and uber successful. But, for every Tom Cruise and every Will Smith, there's like 1,000 people who came to LA and did not make it, and like you always joke that they're like the waiters and things like that, so I kind of wanted to tell more of a well-rounded story about, entertainment and movies and TV, about the people who are in all stages of their careers, not just the Will Smiths and the Tom Cruises. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with the first book, at least. So
that's what I found very appealing about your writing. It's the every person look of Hollywood. Some people, when they write stories, immediately jump to a Hollywood superstar who, in his or her spare time, runs around at night solving mysteries.
like a Batman.
Yeah, Batman, precisely. But you capture the kind of the gritty side of what it's all about. I like the opening scene in your second book, Hollywood Ending. Now, I don't want to give any away. There will be no spoilers here, but you kind of picked up in that opening chapter the gritty side of being on the street in Hollywood. As you said, there's 1,000 people who come out there for every Will Smith and Tom Cruise, and these are the folks who are, struggling to get by. So Kellye, do we see any of you in the characters that you have in these books, whether it's the protagonist or any of the complementary characters there? Is part of your story there too?
So I guess for people who don't know, I don't know if you, so Hollywood, the idea behind my books, it's the Detective by Day series, and it's about I describe her as a semi-famous, mega broke black actress who takes on the deadliest, role of her life, which is a private detective. And so the first book is kind of about how she gets into being a private detective, and she actually is semi-famous where she used to kind of be like kind of like the Popeyes chicken lady. Like she would like kind of shill fried chicken and she loses her contract, you know. So at the time she's kind of like she was like famous once upon a time and she's just dead broke and just desperate for money because her family's about to lose her house. And she happens to drive by a hit and run and finds out that the police are offering a $15,000 reward for them for information on it. You know, so that's how she kind of falls into it, where she's kind of like, if I can just, you know, figure out what the car was, I had to have driven by the car, I can get this money and help my family. You know, and so when I wrote it, I was feeling very ambivalent about Hollywood. Like I was no longer working in television. I was trying to figure out my next steps. And so that kind of ambivalence about Hollywood is definitely seen in the main character. Her name is Dana, you know, and so I think she has that element of me. She also has my sarcasm, but just kind of like that, just kind of being at the time I was very lost and not sure where I wanted to go next in my career. And so I definitely kind of used Dana to work out some of my own issues there. So
And may I ask, what brought you to Hollywood in the first place? You were born and raised in New Jersey, and that's a real leap, 3,000 miles across the country to end in Hollywood, where, as you said, a lot of people go in there trying to get their careers going.
I knew I always wanted to write since I was 5 years old. I wanted to write books, and I was always afraid to write a book. I was scared. And so I kind of did every type of writing. So I was a journalist right out of undergrad. And I was writing about people in Hollywood. And it was kind of like I was like, 21, 22. You think, the whole world's your oyster. And you're like, I could either write about people, doing something cool, or I can actually do something cool myself. So I applied to grad school at USC, which is, I think, I consider it to be the top film school in the country, their screenwriting program. And so I got accepted and I did a 2-year program and I had my master's in screenwriting and screen and television writing.
Cool.
So that's how I went into it. Just that I was afraid to write a book, but I wanted to write something, and I thought it'd be pretty cool to write movies and TV shows.
Could we talk about some of the TV shows that you worked on while you were a
Sure.
screenwriter?
Basically, I the main show I worked on, I did some developing, but I worked on a TV show called Cold Case. It was on CBS,
Remember it well.
15 years ago, and it was what they call a procedural, where it was a murder mystery,
Hmm.
every week, kind of like a Law and Order. But the hook of Cold Case was that obviously, as the name implies, it was cold cases, so it would flash back to the victim's life. So you not only had the present day investigation, had the flashbacks to the victim's life, and you kind of saw how they ended up in the situation that led to their demise. And so I it was cool because I learned a lot about plotting and a lot of the things I learned about plotting in television, because there's certain things where, with TV you only have about like 40 minutes, 42 minutes, if you don't count commercials. And so you can't there's not a lot of time just to like have a character walking down the street admiring the trees and the birds and all that stuff. Like every scene has to that's fireworks in my house. My neighbor's shooting off fireworks. Um have to move the plot along. So every scene has to kind of move the story around along. So I definitely use that in my books. And the other thing I really got from it was that they have what they call act outs, which is the last scene before the commercial, back when people actually watch commercials. And it had to be such an impactful climactic moment that you sat through like 3 minutes, 5 minutes of commercials to see what happens next. So I kind of took that concept with the ends of my chapters, trying to end every chapter on a climactic high note. So hopefully, when you're reading it, you're like, "Oh, I just want to read one more chapter and see what happens." One more chapter. So that's what I hope I do, and I think that I do it well in some places.
No, you do it very well. You
Thank you.
do
I
it very well.
appreciate. I'm glad you think that. So those are the two main things I kind of got from working in television.
Um, Kellye, I wanted to talk a little about what attracted you to cozy mysteries. But maybe before we do that, for the audience, let's talk a little bit about what cozy mysteries are and how they're different from your typical mystery thriller that so many have.
Sure. So
Uh,
cozy
I'm sorry, please.
So cozy mysteries are, they're lighter mysteries, and there's no on the page violence, there's no on the page sex. For the most part, there's no on the page cursing, they're just very light, they're kind of the comedic version of mysteries, although not all of them are comedy. And so it's definitely involved into the tropes you kind of were mentioning earlier, but at its base, it's usually an amateur detective. It's usually a woman, who someone around her dies and she has the bright idea to look into what happened. And, usually she's the victim, she's not the victim, but she's the person that they think did it, or, it's a friend of hers who died. So she has some personal interest in finding out what happened. It's kind of like basically Murder She Wrote.
Mhm.
Murder She Wrote is
Yes,
a TV version of a cozy, basically. So
good. And what attracted you to the cozy as opposed to some of the harder types of fiction that are out
I
there?
I have a very overactive imagination. Like there's a James Patterson novel, might be Kiss the Girls, that I tried to read 20 years ago, and there was such a disturbing scene in that book that I still remember it and I still like freak out thinking about it. And so I just can't read dark stuff. However, I still like mysteries and I still like, the whodunits and the twists of it and, trying to figure out what happened. And so when you like mysteries, but you can't read the darker stuff, cozies are a great alternative to that, and they're called traditional mysteries. They're also called amateur detective novels, but those type of novels just appealed to me just based on things I like to read and things I couldn't read.
I enjoy them myself. Since I kind of immersed myself in the world of mysteries and thrillers a number of years ago, and I've been reading mysteries and thrillers for about 30 years, but only in the last several years with the Mystery Writers of America have I really jumped in, and my clients in my real life work. Some of the let's call them the non-cozy type mysteries are pretty bloody. Um,
Yeah.
I grew up in Brooklyn, so I don't scare too easily. But some of the books I was reading were kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I'm
They're
going to do
pretty
this again.
bad.
Yeah.
And then if you think about it as a writer, if you read a book, it takes, what, like, according to my Kindle, it takes 4 hours of actual reading time for me to read a book. But when you're writing a book, it takes a good year,
Hmm.
usually around a year. And so I don't even want to be in a world where I have to spend, a month, trying to torture somebody, get information. So I didn't want to be in that world as a writer either, just having to spend so much time in such a dark place.
I know what you mean. I mean, I know what you mean. One writer who remained nameless is a doctor in real life, and when you get into their books, it's like, wow. You know, obviously, they did very well in medical school,
Yeah.
but some
But
people like it.
some people like it, like you said, and it's obviously those books sell really well, so there's a huge market for it. But I wish I could, but I just can't. I can't read those. So
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I would, in my younger days, I probably would have, thought twice about going out on a date with somebody who was a big fan of serial killer books. But
mhm,
that's just me.
yeah, and that was the thing about cold cases. There were some people, and what we have on TV. They have what they call a writers' room, which is there's about 10 writers on a TV show, and we all sit in a room in a conference room and just talk about what happens in each episode. And there were some people on Cold Case who loved that, would just like read serial killer books for fun, and that was just not me ever.
Yeah, yeah. There was one TV show which I I enjoy very much, except for one thing. It's Criminal Minds.
Yeah, I was just
I,
thinking that as soon as you said that, I was like, he's talking about Criminal Minds.
I love the ensemble work of the characters when they're together, they're working together. What turned me off the show, and I didn't look at it very often, was the violence on the other side.
Yeah. And that's
Particularly the
like the whole
violence.
hook of the show, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially the violence towards women, children. I'm kind of like, yeah, on one hand, I like the acting. I think the writing is very good, but I didn't watch it that often just because I just didn't like the dark side of it. It just got a little too dark. And I understand the one of the initial actors was a Manny Panikin, I think the name. I may be pronouncing that wrong. Apparently, he quit the show after the first season because one, he didn't like the idea of working on a TV series. Uh, Secondly, he said it was just too dark, too many of the stories. He just couldn't do that every week for Lord knows how long. So he dropped out. Um, so yeah, there's again, some people like it. They do well in the ratings. They They certainly make a lot of people a lot of money, and I will read them. But yeah, the cozy mystery is a kind of a safe place to go. Whether it's in your case, a struggling actress in Hollywood. Uh, Other people will have characters. Somebody owns a bar or a diner, and yes, and then the classic, little old lady with the pet cat and the cookies.
That's a thing. I think usually for you can identify a cozy where there's some kind of hook, like, oh, she has it. I think an agent described it as having a trade, like she bakes cupcakes or she bakes cookies or she's a glass blower, or she makes puzzles, and there's
Hmm.
it's always a hook, a hook to it. And there's hook cozies that don't have a hook, but I think when you think of cozies today in 2020, that's like the tropes. The tropes of the cozies are what you said, where it's a woman who comes back to her hometown, and she picks up a trade, and she has this collection of quirky people in this hometown, and she has a cat or a dog, so there's definitely certain tropes that you find in cozies today that you
Well,
did not have when I was started reading them like 20 years, 30 years ago. So
what I find particularly interesting with uh, cozies in particular is the assortment of characters that surround the main character,
yeah, it's fun. They're fun characters. They're quirky.
and yeah, they they support the story and they move it along, and you kind of are, you're sad when they leave for a reason. They don't come back. They either die off or they get killed off. Um,
I mean, to me, it's kind of like a TV show, and I think that maybe that's also why I originally kind of went to cozies. It's like a TV show. You have certain characters, and over the course of 20, 22, 24 episodes, you kind of get to know them, and they become like your friends and your family because they're in your house every week. And to me, cozies and series, same thing with PI series though too. Those series, that's the same thing where you have these characters that you get to know really well. And there's going to be a cast of characters that you see in every book that you're going to, love them or hate them for whatever reason. But that to me is what I love about cozies.
well, one of the things that I like is when you discover a new author. Like a number of years ago, I discovered an author up in Maine, Sarah Graves, and she wrote a cozy series based upon a single mother who goes up to Eastport, Maine, which is the farthest eastern town in America out in the Atlantic Ocean, and relocates from Manhattan with her son, sets up her life. And the theme for the first 17, 18 books was house repair. And there'd always be
Oh, yeah,
some
yeah.
some theme. Recently, she switched off to chocolate recipes, which are pretty good. If I could ever eat chocolate again.
Mhm.
And what I liked about them was the characters that she created behind there. She took a real life town, and what she did was she populated it with this family, friends. The ex-husband came in for a while, and he made it seem so realistic. And when something happened to one of the regular characters, they moved away, or the son's girlfriend broke up with him, or something like that. You felt bad that you couldn't see them anymore.
Mhm.
And it just what I also liked when I discovered Sarah was that she had written probably about 16 books at that point, so I was able to binge read all of them. Which
Right, yeah.
thanks to Kindles and Nooks these days, you can do that. I can remember, I'm probably dating myself here, but you discover an author like uh, I don't know if anybody in the audience has heard of Simon Brett, British author, used to write for BBC, and he created a character called Charles Paris. Charles Paris was a down on his luck actor in London who struggled to make a living. And each book would have a different aspect of being a struggling actor in England, doing amateur theater, going to the Edinburgh Festival, being on a BBC show, things like that, being on uh, one of the plays of the major theaters. And what I enjoyed the books. Unfortunately, most of them are out of print. So I spent a few years wandering through used bookstores when we used to have used bookstores, looking for these books. Uh, Finally, I was able to get them all. But it's enjoyable when you meet a new group of friends, a new family where you can just delve into them and enjoy them for as long as you can keep finding their books.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which leads me to my next question. Since I'm enjoying your series so much, are we going to see any future escapades from the detective?
Not right now. Unfortunately, my publisher closed before I could finish the third book. So right now we just have the two in the series, and I'm actually working on what they call a standalone, which is a book that's not in a series. That's a
Mhm.
bit more serious that I'm really enjoying.
Good.
But I'm proud of the two books that I did with Dana, and hopefully one day I can revisit them and see where they are and how they're doing. So
We, we, we certainly hope so, and I know I do.
yeah.
You mentioned your publisher closing. Um, a lot has been going on in the publishing industry right now. We have the rise of Amazon. We had the demise of the bookstores. Even Barnes and Noble is struggling right now. And this is all before the pandemic came along and leveled the playing field. How are you as a writer finding it to get your books published, work with an agent, work with a publisher? What's it like for you?
I mean, I can't really talk on that just because my publisher closed in 2018.
Mm.
So my publisher was out the game way before the pandemic. I've been with my same agent since my whole career, so since 2014. So we've been together for 6 years, and I think the climate right now is a little weird where the pandemic has made things slower. People have to buy books differently. They have to order them from bookstores or, obviously the Kindles and stuff like that, which makes it tricky. I just heard from a friend that what happens is usually when before your book comes out, they have what they call advanced reader copies, which are
Mhm.
ARCs, and they make physical copies of your book and they send them out to reviewers and things like that. And she was saying that her publisher's not doing physical ARCs anymore, and because of what's going on right now. There's definitely small things like that that's going on. On the flip side, which is it's a good thing that's happening because of horrible circumstances, but because of this increased, attention to Black Lives Matter, a lot of publishers and a lot of agents are looking for diverse authors
Good.
now more than ever, which is, like I said, is good, but unfortunately, it shouldn't take a person killed to
No.
have this happen, which is I think it's been hard for me as a Black woman who writes mysteries, and I think other people I've talked to of color, especially Black people, say the same thing where it's just really hard to have this attention suddenly, finally, and it's because of such a horrible reason. But I know a lot of people who are, finally getting agents who weren't getting them before, Black men, Black women, people of color. I know people who are selling their books at auction, which is when more than one publisher wants it, so they bid on it, and usually you get more money than you would if just one
Mhm.
publisher wanted it. Selling at auction and preamps, and then it was unheard of for a black person to sell at auction, you know, 5 years ago when I first started, and now I know a couple people who sold at auction. So it's been an interesting time, and I'm very curious to see how it plays out, because what we don't want is this to be a trend. We don't want this to be, something that they want right now, and then in 2 or 3 years they don't care again, care anymore, care less. We want them to want these books for as status quo. So
No, I agree with you. And I hope that this is the wave of the future, that
fingers crossed.
it's not just a one-time event where,
Yeah,
unfortunately, because George Floyd was killed,
yeah,
that everybody kind of feels sorry for a few days and then we go
yeah,
back to business as usual. That's
yeah.
wrong. Also, I don't want there to be another George Floyd.
Of course,
Uh,
yeah. That's
yeah,
that's
I want people to sit down with authors because of their talent, because of their books, because of what they bring to the table. Uh, Something we're going to try to do with this show is to have a very broad base of the panelists who we invite here to talk about their writing and their experiences.
I mean, to me, that's kind of an issue that I think when you and I were talking about this, one of the things I was saying is, unfortunately, what's always happened in the past for writers of color in crime fiction, we have these big, conferences, and they have what they call their diversity panel, and they stick all the people of color on the diversity panel, and then
Mhm.
like our whole role in life is just to talk about being how hard it is to be Black, which I can talk about being Black and I'm proud to talk about that, but I can talk about the same things white authors can talk about too, and why can't I get that opportunity?
What?
And so I think to me, I'm like, I think a panel would be really cool to have like a Michael Connolly. He's gonna, who's this really like well-known, big-selling white male author, cis white, straight white male author, to have him on a panel and have someone like me on the panel, or Rachel Halsell Hall, or someone who can provide a different perspective. You're going to have to me, a more interesting panel when it's not just four people from the same backgrounds who have the same stories. So
Agreed. And I don't know if I'll ever get Michael Connolly on the show, but if I do, you'll be the first person I'll be looking for. But you're
I would
right.
love to be on a panel with Michael Connolly. Let me know.
Uh, but trust me, you're going to be the first one to know right after I do. Uh, I think you're right. It's by having these silos for people, whether it's the gender, whether it's race, religion, they hurt us. They work against us. Uh, Talking to you about your books as what they are, which are great stories set in Hollywood, no cookies or cats involved, and I'm hoping that because of this show and the efforts of the people with it, more people will hear about your books, and they're going to start looking for your next one or read the ones that are out there. We're in strange times right now, and what I'm really hoping for is that we can maybe change our mindset here. Black lives do matter,
Definitely.
and we as a society really have to stand up. And excuse me, folks, for getting on my soapbox here for a couple of moments, but we really got to stand up and take a look around what's happening right now in our country and do something about it. Because if not, we deserve whatever happens. Okay, I'll stop now. Now, next question for you, Kellye. Do you have a favorite mystery author or authors?
I read a lot of people. I think in terms of people I admire, Jenna Ivanovich. It's funny when you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about like going to bookstores and like finding a series from the beginning. I can remember there was a Barnes and Noble by my house when I was in high school, and I would just go there and I would just like, go and walk around the shelves and just look for pretty covers. And I remember like when I found her book, I think I found Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series, which is probably like to me like one of the biggest mystery crime fiction series, especially funny ones that are out. Um, it's about a bounty hunter who's not good at her job named Stephanie Plum. Um, I remember like finding the books, and I think I found her at like three. I think it was one for the money, two to score, three to get deadly. And I remember thinking like, what is she gonna do for four? Because the song only has three, three lyrics. And so I just remember like that excitement of finding her books. And in terms of other people, I've always admired Walter Mosley, who is a black man who is probably like one of the preeminent writers, preeminent crime writers, definitely like Bill
Got the Edgar
Clinton's
Award last year.
yeah, the Bill Clinton's like favorite author, like that's like at the level that Walter's on.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked Sue Grafton, who was a woman who passed away a couple years ago, but she kind of broke barriers in the 80s, her and Sarah Paretsky, Marcia Fuller, in terms of writing women-based, women-led, crime fiction series with PIs in them, which before the 80s you really didn't see a lot. And so what I was lucky where I was growing up in the 80s, and I was a teenager in the 90s, and this is when like all these barriers are being broken with both women and also black people in crime fiction. So I had, representation matters. And so I would see people like Walter, I would see people like Barbara Neely, Valerie Wilson Wesley, all these amazing black authors, and I would see, Sarah Paretsky and Sue Grafton and Marcia Muller and Linda Barnes, all these amazing women who were writing. And I was like, okay, well, I know I can write that one day because these people are all doing it. So,
And you mentioned some great authors there. In particular, I just want to call out Sue Grafton. Unfortunately, we lost her a short while ago. And, the famous alphabet series, we'll never get to know who Z was for.
yeah, well, she
Uh,
finished. That was the thing, and so she started her series in the 80s, and it would be like once every 1 or 2 years, starting with A is for alibi, B
yep,
is for burglar, and her plan was to get through the 26 letters of the alphabet. And
yep,
I can remember thinking like, what am I gonna do when she gets to Z? And it never occurred to me that she might pass away, which is so just such a selfish thing to say. But it never I think with all of us, it never occurred to us that she would not finish it. You
I,
know, and
I I'm sorry.
one of the things is her last book was just called X. And she wasn't like Robert, like certain people who wanted to have the series continue on with another writer. She was like, I guess, very adamant that when if I pass away before it's over, then the series is, it ends with X. So we'll
What?
never know what happens with Z. So.
Well, we never will. I mean, I read one article where apparently she told her children that if you ever bring a ghostwriter in to finish the series, I will haunt you till you die.
She had
And
her. If you read her book, she knows she has a really great sense of humor. So I could totally see her
she
saying,
she is. I love them. I used to do a lot of traveling back in the day when I discovered her, and I would always take a couple of her books along with me. Um, and
if you want a book with a really great twist ending, B is for Burglar. Pick that book up. It's amazing. It's what makes me want to have really good twists in
yeah,
my books.
yeah, she was a great writer, and she's sorely missed. And no, you're not selfish when you say you missed that last book because I think we're all going to miss it.
Yeah.
And she just she left us way too soon, and
Yes.
we still got the other 25.
Yeah. It's amazing. Which is to have a career like that's amazing, So
Oh, it
25
is.
books in the same series. And I was struggling to finish 2 books in a series, so I can't imagine, having have to keep a character fresh for 25 books.
Well, one thing I've noticed, and I've been working with writers in their social media now for a few years, and the writers who seem to have done very well are the writers who seem to have started in that period you just mentioned, the 70s and the 80s, before the technology came along, before the big bookstores came along. They got themselves established. And I wonder today, how difficult would it be for a Sue Grafton to a Linda Barnes to get started, given
I'm
all
tr-
the obstacles in front of them?
I'm trying to I feel like I f- I'm trying to think of what like really popular new series, especially PI, I know Kristen LaBianca had the Roxanne Weary series. There's not a lot of series that are there's a lot of series that are cozies, but when it comes to like PI, you don't find as many series nowadays, new ones.
Hmm.
There's always the ones that you have been long established, like you said already. I think especially for books that are, focused on women, people are writing a lot more like psychological suspense. It's kind of like Gillian Flynn, the Gone Girl, and all the
Hmm.
books that have girls in them. That's such a huge market right now, and those are all what they call standalones.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't see a lot of series right now. So I think that would be tricky for them.
I wonder if it's maybe kind of like just a phase that would grow. It's kind of like, once upon a time on TV, there were like 20 westerns or something, some crazy number like that on, and then it kind of trickled down to about half a dozen, and now I don't think there's a western on TV at all.
I mean, if you think about it, Gone Girl was such a huge book and it created this huge market, and people like make fun of the fact that all these books have girl in the title, but it's this huge market and those books are amazing. When they're done right, psychological suspense books are amazing and they have, these really
Hmm.
great twists in them and like Gone Girl did, So that's this huge market. So I think it's gonna have to take a a Gone Girl type of level of success for a series, and then I think, of course, publishing once follows the money, they're gonna shift back to series. But right now the money is in these amazing psychological suspense novels. So.
True, true. Well, I'm sure it's going to be interesting. What other trends do you see for writers going forward over the next few years, Kelly? Cozy mysteries in particular, or just the genre itself, mysteries in general. You spoke about psychological thrillers.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of people I know. Like I'm working on a standalone right now, so I think people are gonna shift from series. I don't think cozies are ever going to go away, but as we mentioned, the cozy market right now, the way it's set up, even if the character is, technically in their 30s, um, they don't necessarily read like a millennial.
Hmm.
And the readers are tend to be an older woman, which is I think why these books are technically a woman in their 30s or 20s, but they don't really read like a millennial. So I think there's a push to have, millennial cozies, which are, to appeal to millennials, have them, which are books that are going to be a bit more, have a bit more edge to them, and I think
Mhm.
if you read my books, I don't fit the cozy tropes. People told me not to call my book a cozy, just to call it traditional mystery, you know, and I don't have, I still don't have I don't have cursing in my books. I don't have on sex. I don't have sex. I don't have on screen violence, but my books are a bit more edgier. I have like in one scene, like my character walks in on a fetish video shoot, so my books are, I like to think my character Dana is a true millennial. She's not just someone who's 24 or 25. She's actually, a true millennial in how she acts. And so I think we'll see some more books that are focused on millennials, cozies that are edgier. And I'm very curious to see how those are marketed and how they find their audience, since cozy audience is so marketed right now to older women. See how these publishers find millennials to read these books. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think the changing demographics are going to be very interesting in this country going forward. The baby boomers are slowly, sailing off into the sunset.
yeah,
The generations that come after them, the demographics are changed somewhat.
and I think, you know, I it's not, people who are younger, they want certain things. They expect to have books that are diverse. They don't want it just a bunch of, straight white people in the books. They want to see true diversity. They want to see people who are queer. They want to see people who are people of color, not just, like the cop you see in one scene. So I think
Mhm.
you're going to start seeing that. You're already seeing that in books where there's a lot more diversity in cozies and things like that. That's what they demand. So they're a lot more open-minded than older generations are.
How do you think readers and writers are going to handle the perception of law enforcement, given how right now, at least in this country, people are challenging the way our police work. And typically, most mysteries, the police are the good guys, maybe grouchy, maybe grumpy, maybe not very smart. But, I'd probably say, make up a number, 9 out of 10 cops come across as people trying to do their job, even if they don't do it very well. But, now we're looking out there in the age of iPhones and videos, and we're seeing that, a lot of stuff's going on here we didn't know about for a long time. Uh, and it wasn't just one or
Well,
two guys.
certain people didn't know about it. I think people of color
Fair
knew
enough.
about it. It just was
Fair
like
enough.
other people, other
Okay.
people
No, you're
refused
right.
to acknowledge it.
Forgive me. Forgive me. You're right. Uh, Communities of color were definitely being harassed, murdered, and now we have the proof in front of us.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
that's what's changed. Like you said, you think about it, like Rodney King was what, in the early 90s, and that was because of a video, because someone
yep.
happened to have a video camera. Oh, and otherwise that would have never been as big of a thing as it was, And
Yeah.
so now with the advent of everyone having literally a camera in their phones, you're kind of seeing things, and it's hard to say, oh, they must have done something to deserve to die, when you're literally looking at the video and you see that they've done nothing to deserve
Well,
to die.
well,
So
for years we've given the police the benefit of the doubt,
yeah,
and even personally, I've never been too crazy about the idea that even before the whole Black Lives Matter movement started, I was never too crazy about the idea that just because a guy wears a uniform and he's sitting on the stand under oath, his word is worth more than somebody else. I've never been comfortable with that because that can get you into a lot of trouble. It's gotten a lot of other countries in trouble over the years. And now we're finding that these organizations that people looked up to, had faith in, and they're not perfect. They're far from perfect. This is
right.
not
They're
this
not.
is
They're
not
not.
this is just not somebody goofing off and taking an extra coffee break, or doing something like that. We're talking about people's lives here. We talk about what was going on in Jefferson with the harassment, with parking violations, traffic tickets, things like that. Uh, this is not the country I want to live in. And I look at all the books I've been reading now for 30 some years, and you look at the police, and for the most part, they're made to be heroes. And I haven't seen yet too many books that are starting to address the we got bad cops out there. And I don't know how many of them there are, but there's certainly more than one or two. And are we going to maybe see people begin to address that in their books going forward?
I mean, I hope so. You know, my, my family, I've come from a family of cops. Like my granddad was a cop and my uncle was a cop and I have cousins who were cops. And that was like our family. That was one of the things we did. We were cops. And I saw a Facebook post about my grandfather. He was a police officer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they were saying how black people who got in trouble would request that my grandfather come and pick them up because they knew he was going to treat them correctly. You know, he
Mhm.
wasn't going to abuse his power. You know, and so I think it's obviously you can still have good cops, but I just think it's more like you can't just expect every cop you have there to be perfect or to have the entire organization, you know, police organization to be perfect. You know, and I think you can have one good cop but still address that there's some problems in the organization and there's some problems with some of his, you know, his cohorts and his coworkers. So
I agree with you, but I also feel that there's responsibility for the people at the top. You know, as we, you know, again, just my personal opinion here, but when we put a uniform on somebody, when we put stripes on their sleeve, when we put stars on their shoulders, and they move up, we have higher expectations for them than we do for some person who's sitting out there in the street, uh, you know, just goofing off. Uh,
definitely,
and I think,
you know,
and I
and
think we. I'm sorry, please.
I'll keep going.
No.
You know, it's I don't know enough about it, but I know because I live in New Jersey, and I know that they were saying that Camden, which is one of like, you know, our bigger cities in New Jersey, they were saying that the police chief came in a couple years ago and he just changed the way that police handled situations, you know,
Mhm.
and how they address situations, and it's worked out really well. And I don't know enough about it to say what he did, but that idea of just kind of changing how you train these cops to deal with these situations, like you said, making sure that they don't think they're like, you know, kind of like this powerful being, basically have they literally have someone's life in their hands
Yeah. And
and
when you have the
abuse
high
that power.
responsibility, you've got to be very careful. And I'll tell you what happened in Camden, because I live in Jersey too. The new guy came in, he fired the whole police department, uh, and everybody had to apply back for their jobs. Some guys got it, some guys didn't. The other change they made, they took the police department, and instead of just being for the city of Camden, they made it for the surrounding community. I don't know if it's the entire county or just several townships and the city of Camden. And I've been reading that, you know, results are better.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I've heard, like I said, they were kind of saying that, you know, and I was like, you know, I live in Newark, which is in the other big city in New Jersey, and you know, we had our protests, and I remember I was just so nervous, you know, when it happened, because I was like, you know, at that time, a lot of looters were kind of coming in after the protests or the peaceful protests were over, and kind of using that to their
mhm.
advantage to kind of mess stuff up, just to be, you know, to be, because not because they cared about what was going on, just to mess things up. And I was just so nervous that it was going to happen in Newark, and it didn't. We just had peaceful protests, you know, and I think
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
it's because of just the way that people were.
yeah. No, I agree with you. I think New Jersey is, you know, having been born and raised over in Brooklyn, uh, New Jersey has a very different temperament than New York. Uh, and I think also the fact that the cities are not as large.
Yeah.
A place like New York, you've got, you know, just an incredible amount of politics, complexity, Lord knows what else. It just people write books about it, and they'll be writing books about it for the next 1,000 years. But you look at what's happened in New York in the last several months, where we've had peaceful protests, and then we've had people who have taken advantage of the peaceful protest was chaos. And let's just say what it is. The people who are causing the trouble are probably troublemakers by nature, but they
Yeah.
also going to be people from the other side who are just trying to come in and make
Yeah.
the protesters look bad.
I think
Uh,
that was like my issue with it, was that it was like always like you'd have the peaceful protest, and then at nighttime that's when it happened. Like, you know, like the people
mhm.
were there for 8 hours and suddenly it got dark and they're like, I'm gonna get violent, you know,
Yeah,
and so many people like love to use that, like, oh, the building got destroyed, like as a way to deflect from the bigger issue.
and again, I go back to the policing too. And again, I'm not a cop, never been a cop. I've had relatives and friends who have been police, but sometimes you got to ask yourself, do they just maybe pull back when they see the trouble coming to let it happen, so they can come back then and say, "I told you so." Um, I don't want to be too cynical, but these I think are issues that are out there. And another big issue for me is true community policing. Police forces have to reflect the communities they police. If they don't reflect the communities they police, you can have the kind of problems we have all over the country. In New York City, many police live outside the city. Now, part of the problem for that is housing costs are so expensive. And theoretically, if you live outside the city, if you pay your city taxes, you can still be a New York City cop. Well, sure, but if you got guys who live out in Suffolk or up in Westchester or Orange County, and they got a 2-3 hour commute into the city to do their job, they're really not part of the community. And I think it's very important that the police forces, all the security forces, reflect the communities they're supposed to protect, because you get a more humane, realistic perspective then, I feel, than we have a bunch of, what some people call mercenaries coming in out of the suburbs every day. Excuse me, I've been getting up in my soapbox too often tonight. But these again are themes that I hope we'll start seeing appear in books over the next few years, where people kind of challenge this monolithic idea of the police are good. And again, I don't want to badmouth every cop that's out there. There are guys out there who are.
So yeah, I have my family's cops, so I know there's definitely good cops out there.
Yeah. But they're part of a system that makes it difficult for them to maybe have the influence they want to do what they want. And I think we need to address it. And I think that literature, whether it's mystery thrillers, other types of literature, are an opportunity to get some of these issues out there, get people thinking about them, get people talking about them in ways that sometimes just the cut and dried news can't do things. When this is, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, we lost John Lewis. And, John Lewis was a great man. But I think the defining moment in John Lewis's life was when we saw that video, black and white video of him walking across a bridge, wearing nothing but a trench coat and a backpack, and getting the crap, excuse my French, crap kicked out of him by a bunch of guys.
The images, seeing those images are undeniable. So.
Yeah, and that did it. So, okay, we covered a lot of issues here and talked a lot, Kellye. Any other points that you'd like to make about your writing or things that are going on in your life right now?
No, not really. Any other questions?
No, I'm come to the end of my questions. So maybe what we can do is let's turn it open to the audience and see if we can get any questions from them. So folks in the audience, if you either would like to speak up and talk to us, or if you would like to just in nearby chat, put in your questions, Kellye and I will be very happy to answer them if we can. Okay, not all at once, folks.
Yeah, I know, right? This is right.
This is generally part of the show where I threaten to bring up some of my vacation videos if we don't start getting some responses. Although I got to be careful. Last time I said that, everybody left. Okay, here we got a question from Isabel. Does Kellye think Newark would be a good backdrop for a crime mystery?
Yes, I do. I think, Newark is definitely a very urban place, and you have a variety of people. And I think the other interesting thing about Newark is that it's a hub to get into the city. Whenever there's a hub to get in the city, you're going to have a wide variety of people who live there. And especially in downtown, you have a wide variety of people, so I think Newark is interesting because it has such a variety of people from different income levels, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And that. So I do think Newark would be a really great place, but I think you'd have to actually know Newark. I wouldn't just set a story, I'm going to set a story in Newark and have never been to Newark. I think that would help. I think one of the things that was so great about The Wire was that it was pretty clear that David Simon knew that area. And, knew those people. And I think that's what made it feel so authentic versus, someone who's like sitting in a room, like, I'm going to write about, drug dealers, having never met a drug dealer or talked to them or know anything about them other than they sell drugs. So
that is one of my pet peeves about mysteries. And I know many authors have the same one, which is somebody goes on vacation for a couple of weeks to, let's say, Bar Harbor, Maine, and all of a sudden they go home and they're going to write a murder mystery set in Bar Harbor, Maine. And the same thing with Newark. And I know Newark because I used to take the train through it
Yeah, see,
every
it's
day
just a
for a good
hub.
number of
Yeah.
years. It's a hub. And when you get on the streets of Newark, it's very different than New York City. It's got its own personality. It's got its own communities. Uh, you, as you drive through the city, you can see the old bank buildings, other office buildings that have been converted to other purposes, just like you see in New York and many other cities. So to think you could, you know, just wander through one day and write a murder mystery there without really knowing the people, what goes on, you're not going to succeed.
Yes, I think it's similar to like when you can always tell. I remember like a couple of years ago, I read a book. People always want to set their books in New York City. Like, I think they think it's sexy, but you
Mm.
can tell when someone has never been to New York City. Like, I remember I was reading a book and the person, like, it's like, oh, I knocked on my brother's front door and he opened the door and I was like, if people who have front doors in New York City that like go out to the street are, people who are really, really rich. Most people don't
Mhm.
have front doors like that. They usually have a front door that goes into an apartment building or a brownstone with several apartments. So and I think it was like Upper West Side that she had the brother live on. She's like, "Oh, and then he parked his car." And I was like, "Parking's not easy either."
Yeah,
So I think you have to know the area a little bit to write about it to make it authentic.
you do. You do. And parking, another one of my pet peeves in stories that are set in New York City. Anybody who's tried to park in New York City in the last 20 years, it ain't easy, folks.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Uh, and, the idea, the other thing, I like your example of opening the front door. Nobody in New York City opens their front door, whether they got a private home or an apartment, without first checking through the peephole.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So,
Oh, okay. Here we have another question from Bartson. She asks, thank you, Kellye. You talked about diversity being important. Do you have any kinds of characters you are planning to introduce and explore for their points of view?
I as a black woman, I actually write what I know, so all my characters are always black women. And what I'm working on right now, I have a character who is an older black woman who is a lesbian, and there's there's a lot of homophobia in the black community, um, which I find interesting for a variety of reasons. That's another conversation. And so kind of like the idea behind it is like this older black woman who kind of fell in love and she's roommates. Like I think a lot of it's like not even just black people, but you hear about people in the 60s who were like they never married, but they lived with their roommate for 20 years. And it's like the
Hmm.
roommate is code for their significant other. So I kind of have a character that I'm really excited about that's like the grandmother character this book who is this older woman. I never straight up say she's a lesbian, but it's pretty clear that she was the love of the life of my character's deceased grandmothers.
Yeah, that should be very interesting. When you're ready for your book to be published, you have to come back to us,
Oh,
please,
definitely.
and
Please love to.
and talk about it. Okay. So, anybody else out there have any questions for us? Just want to point out that we have the book covers from both of Kellye's books behind us. The first one, Hollywood Homicide, and the other one, Hollywood Ending, over to my left here on the stage. And I would, encourage you to go out and get copies and read them. They're great books.
I have a
Hope,
story about my cover. I
please.
can so Hollywood Homicide, which is the cover behind me, my book was originally not called Hollywood Homicide. It was originally called Payday. My
Hmm.
character's name was Dana, and I really thought it was such a clever title, and I didn't come up with it, so I can say it's a very clever title. And when they initially were coming up with the idea for the cover, they had this idea of kind of featuring my main character as the focal point of the cover, and just like this woman, this beautiful black woman, just staring basically right at you. And the issue they were saying was that the title, there's no way from this cover that you can tell that this is a mystery novel. So they had to change my title so you could tell it was a mystery. So the reason why my title is Hollywood Homicide is because of my cover. And I love my cover, so I'm not mad at it, but it's just so interesting. Like that's kind of the things you never hear about when it comes to books and how things are done with books. So
So those are the little stories and perspectives that we get from writers like yourself that I love. What went on to create the title, what went on to create the book cover.
And then the
Uh,
second one, the book I was writing, I would finish the book and they did this cover and this is what she looked like. And it's actually based on a scene that's at the end of the book, and that's not what she looked like when I wrote it. So I was able to change in edits, and I changed it so the character looks like has the purple dress on and has her hair wavy, So that's the other thing, which is interesting, is I had to change a scene to based on the cover. And I have a friend who they put a swimming pool on the cover of her book, and she's like, "I got to write a swimming pool into my book now." So,
I'm sure publishers and editors can drive you crazy. I've heard some horror stories over the years. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the hour, folks. Don't see any more questions coming in. And that last question from YouTube, sorry, the prior question came from YouTube, and thank you, Isabel, for pointing that out. Kellye, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, talking
thank
about
you.
your.
This was I've never done Second Life, and so and though as Colin pointed out, I have a similar thing in my book, but I've actually never done it. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Becky. I want to thank Isabel, because Becky's the one who put together my avatar and gave me the outfit and the hair and everything. And so I just want to thank you guys for taking so much time to make this such a great experience for me. So thank you.
Your fellow writers or the people you know in the publishing community. If anybody would like to come on and have us be on the show with us, we'd love to have them. We're putting together our panels for the next several months, and we've got some open slots, and we would love to have folks on. So what I'm going to say now, folks, is we're going to be ending our live broadcast. Please contact me at conpsweeney@somedi.com. That's SONEDDI.com. If you have any suggestions for panelists, ideas for shows, or if you wish to participate yourself. I'm also learning that putting on one of these shows isn't easy, and it takes a crew of people to make it happen. So if you'd like to volunteer to help out on our stage crew, let me know as well. We'd love to have you. We're going to have another guest next month. Hopefully I'll be finalizing this week the final details for his appearance, and we'll get the word out shortly. But I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you again next month, and please stay safe and keep reading. Thank you very much, and take care now.
Bye, everybody.